The hollow guest. The knocking came at 2:17 am, 3 deep, arrhythmic thuds that echoed through the cottage like the closing of a tomb. It wasn't frantic like a stranger in need, nor polite like a neighbor's visit. It was final, weighty, like the sound of something that knew it had already been invited. Eleanor froze mid-step, halfway between the bedroom and kitchen, her bare feet cooling against the hardwood floor that creaked beneath her in protest. The only light came from the dying embers of the fireplace behind her, casting long, flickering shadows up the stone chimney like skeletal fingers reaching skyward. A fog had rolled in thick and silent off the lake hours earlier, pressing against the windows with a suffocating stillness that made the outside world feel impossibly distant. No animals cried. No wind stirred. It was as if something had silenced the land itself, commanding all things to wait. She stood in the narrow hallway, her heart pounding with the measured cadence of a warning drum, and slowly turned her eyes toward the door. There was again thunk, each strike louder than the last, though not in volume but in presence. It vibrated through the bones in her chest and reverberated against the hollowness of the cottage, as though the sound didn't echo from the wood, but from within her. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe a branch in the wind. Maybe the wood expanding in the cold. But deep in her gut, beneath the grief she wore like a shroud since Mark died, she knew this wasn't the kind of lie you could swallow and keep down. She reached for the brass key hanging from the wall beside the door, not to unlock it, but to make sure it was locked, and the instant her fingers touched the cold metal, she felt it again, a whisper of breath, but not hers. It touched the nape of her neck, humid and stale, smelling of earth and old cloth, like the air inside a coffin cracked open too late. She spun around, knife quick, expecting to see someone, or something, looming behind her. But the hallway was empty, quiet, and long. Too long. She squinted. Was the layout always like that? Had the mirror at the end of the hall always been turned inward, reflecting nothing? No, she had moved that earlier. She was certain. Eleanor swallowed hard, suddenly aware that the stillness wasn't just in the world outside. The cottage listened. Not passively, but with the focus of a beast crouched in the dark, waiting for the right moment to show its teeth. The grief had done strange things to her mind in the weeks since the funeral. She knew that. The therapist had suggested she take time away from the city. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere safe. And so she came here, to the old family cottage Mark had inherited but never visited. It sat at the edge of Black Hollow Lake, an hour from the nearest gas station and 2 from the nearest cell tower. No reception. No internet. Just thick trees, crawling mist, and stories passed down by locals too superstitious to even fish on the water. She'd laughed when the real estate agent mentioned that, the part about the hollow guest. Some rural legend. A wandering spirit, they said, that doesn't knock to come in, but to come back. You'll know it by the knock, the agent had warned, her voice half in jest but her eyes saying something else. 3 knocks. No more. No less. And if you answer, it remembers you. Eleanor hadn't thought about that story until now. But now, oh God, now it clawed at her memory like a splinter buried too deep to pull free. She inched toward the door, telling herself she wouldn't open it, just peek through the peephole, just look. But her hand moved with a will not her own, fingers curling around the antique brass knob slick with condensation. And then, silence. No more knocking. No footsteps. Just the agonizing wait. She leaned closer to the door, heart hammering so loudly she thought it might give her away. Her eye met the peephole. Nothing. Blackness. Not the porch. Not the fog. Just black. And then something moved. Not across the frame, but in it. A pale shape, pressed so tightly against the other side of the door that the peephole became an eye itself, forced into intimacy with something unspeakably near. No features. No skin. Just the blurred impression of something once human, smeared by time and decay. Her body rebelled, lurching her back as the door creaked, not open, but inward, as though bowing to the presence on the other side. Eleanor stumbled, catching herself on the table, scattering her teacup across the floor. The hot porcelain hissed against the cool air as the door gently shivered against its hinges. No wind had touched it. No hand had turned the knob. And yet, they moved. And somewhere deep in the house, far beyond the walls, she heard something new, a voice. Not loud. Not angry. But familiar. "Ellie," it whispered. Mark's voice. Fragile. Wet with grief. And filled with a hunger that didn't belong to him. Her husband had been dead for 5 months. The voice shattered her. Not in volume, but in the way it belonged. It wasn't a distorted imitation or a trick of memory. It was Mark's voice exactly as she remembered, low, patient, the kind that used to make her feel safe when the world spun too fast. But now, in this moment, spoken from behind a door that pulsed with unnatural cold, it hollowed her out from the inside. Her mouth moved soundlessly, a desperate attempt to call his name, but her vocal cords had curled inward in fear. The only sound in the room was the subtle drip 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 of water from the ceiling into the porcelain saucer she'd forgotten she set out beneath a leak. Mark was dead. She'd watched them lower his casket into the earth. Closed casket. The crash. The fire. No body to hold. Just the charred remnants of his phone and his watch, mailed to her with an apology too formal to be comforting. And yet, here was his voice, gentle, tender, unmistakably his, calling her from behind a door that refused to fully close or open. "It's cold out here. I don't know how I got here. Please, open the door." The temptation rippled through her like the phantom pain of an amputated limb. She wanted it to be real. Wanted him to step into the light and smile with those crooked teeth he always hated in photos. Wanted to bury her face in his chest and let her knees buckle under the weight she'd been carrying alone for 5 long months. But the air around the door had soured. It had a taste now, metallic, foul, like coins left too long on the tongue. That wasn't how it felt when Mark was alive. That wasn't love behind the door, it was longing. Something ancient and rotted had studied him, worn his voice like wet clothing, and knocked not because it was lost, but because it knew she might want to believe. She backed away slowly, the floor groaning louder with each step, and something behind the walls groaned back. Not wood. Not pipes. Something alive. The air inside the cottage had thickened, humid and too still, like a room where something had died and refused to be found. The kitchen clock had stopped at 2:17. No ticking. No hum from the fridge. Time itself felt suspended, held in the cupped hand of whatever had entered with the knocking. She didn't know when she first noticed the whispers, only that they were suddenly there, soft as thread, brushing against the base of her skull and curling around her thoughts. At first, it was just one voice, far off. Then another. Then 3, weaving in and out of each other like reeds in a stream. Some mournful. Some furious. Some speaking languages she didn't know but somehow understood. They called her by name, not as one voice, but as a chorus. They knew her regrets. Her secrets. Her guilt. "You left him alone too long," one hissed in her left ear. "You let the fire take him. You cried more at the funeral than in the marriage. You never really believed he was gone, did you?" Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold tiles, her breath coming in shallow bursts as the walls seemed to breathe around her, swelling, contracting, exhaling that scent of damp rot and ash. Above her, the ceiling crackled faintly as a hairline split formed across the plaster, trailing down like a lazy vein. From within it, a black liquid began to bead and fall in slow, deliberate droplets. Not water. Not sap. Something thicker. Something wrong. She dragged herself to her feet using the edge of the counter, her hands slipping briefly on the slick surface as she steadied herself. The knife was gone. She hadn't heard it fall. Had she dropped it? Had something taken it? A cold gust brushed her ankles. She looked down. The basement door, the one she always kept bolted, stood open just a crack. It led to a place she had never entered, not even when she first arrived 2 weeks ago. Mark's uncle had warned her in the will's handwritten note, "Don't disturb what's beneath." She had laughed, thought it a poetic way of saying the foundation was rotting. Now she wasn't so sure. "Ellie," the voice again, this time from the top of the stairs behind her. But how? She spun around. Nothing. The hall stretched too long again, its geometry subtly wrong, like a dream trying to impersonate waking life. The mirror at the end flickered, not with light, but with motion. She squinted. No, not a reflection. A window. It showed her standing in the kitchen, but behind her, something moved. A shape. Barely humanoid. Pale and raw, like a body not yet finished. Limbs that twitched with the memory of being alive. Its head tilted, bird-like, then snapped forward with a jerk as if it had just realized it was being seen. She turned too fast, her vision spinning with vertigo, but the room behind her was empty. Still, she knew it had been real. The mirror, no, the thing pretending to be a mirror, had shown her a glimpse, not of what was, but what would be. She was being hunted, not for death, but for belief. That thing wanted her to invite it, to validate it. It needed her grief, her longing, her loneliness, a doorway no lock could hold shut. And in the corners of the room, she began to see it, little slivers of movement, shadows that shifted when they thought she wasn't looking. The cottage was no longer hers. It was an organism now, and she was the foreign body trapped inside. Every breath she took echoed as if it were being mimicked. The walls had mouths. The floors had eyes. The dead knew her name. And the door behind her opened just a few inches more, soundlessly, the air curling in like a tongue, tasting her sanity. The door creaked wider without sound, the kind of movement that didn't disturb the air but rearranged it, bending the atmosphere itself like a yawn from something ancient and recently woken. Eleanor didn't run. She should have. Her instincts screamed for her to bolt through the back door, to leap into the foggy woods and tear barefoot through pine needles and root-knotted soil until she collapsed. But something deeper, older, sadder, rooted her in place. The same weight that had kept her in bed for weeks after Mark's funeral, that had silenced her phone and dulled her senses, it was back now, only thicker, almost alive, as if her grief had become something separate from her. It stood just outside the frame of her vision, breathing slow and wet against her ear, whispering why run, when there's nothing left to run to? Her hands shook as she gripped the kitchen counter. Her breath came short and tight. The house groaned again, not from the wind, but like something stretching beneath the floorboards. It didn't sound inhuman. No, that was the worst part. It sounded like someone trying to sound human. Like teeth learning to choose syllables for the first time. Then the lights flickered, not in staccato bursts like electricity failing, but in long, slow pulses, as if sinking to a heartbeat that was not hers. The room darkened, walls breathing in and out, and she realized the architecture had subtly shifted again. The layout of the house was wrong. Hallways where closets used to be. Doors at strange angles. Windows that now looked inward instead of out. The cottage had become a shifting maze of memory and mourning, a labyrinth formed from the rot of her unresolved grief. She stepped into the hall, her reflection following her in the mirror, not in sync, but slightly delayed, as though her soul had to catch up with her body. "Mark?" she whispered, the name escaping before she could stop it. The mirror Eleanor smiled. But she hadn't. Her own lips were trembling, drawn tight, and yet the woman in the glass looked peaceful, too peaceful, like a corpse made to smile before burial. Then came the sound. It wasn't footsteps. It was dragging, like someone pulling a sack of wet leaves down wooden stairs. From beneath her. From the basement. The open door breathed cold onto her ankles, and she swore she felt fingertips brush her toes from the darkness. She backed away, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood, needing the pain to anchor her in the now. The whispers in the walls began again, louder this time, urgent and fevered. She remembers now, "Tinos," she called for him, "open the mouth, open the mouth." They chanted that last part over and over, "Open the mouth," like a prayer or an order. Then clarity hit her like a bolt. This place was a mouth. The cottage, the walls, the fog around it. It was a body, ancient and hollow, and she was already in its throat. She had fed it without knowing. Every night she spent grieving here, every tear, every whispered memory, she'd been nourishing it. Not just the house, something beneath it. Something waiting. Suddenly, her foot sank into the floor. Not through rot or collapse, but as if the floorboards let her in. She screamed, wrenching her leg free just in time, watching as the wood closed behind her like lips. Her shin was scraped raw, blood smearing the grain like a signature. She stumbled into the living room, But the windows were now eyes, watching her without glass or reflection. She saw things inside them, scenes, distorted memories, wrong versions of her past. One showed her wedding to Mark, but in it his face was blurred, replaced with something pale and leering. Another showed her weeping in bed, but in that one, something lay beside her, holding her hand. Eleanor turned from the windows and covered her ears, but the whispers bored through her palms, into her bones. They knew. They all knew. And worst of all, so did she. She ran toward the stairs. Her only thought was the attic. It had no windows. One entrance. A door she could lock. As she ascended, the steps seemed to stretch, longer, slower, heavier. Halfway up, she heard it again, Mark's voice, but this time it was closer. Much closer. "Ellie," it crooned. "I never left. You brought me here." She turned, and what she saw on the stairs behind her would never leave her mind. It was Mark, and it wasn't. His face was correct, down to the dimple in his chin and the freckle on his left cheek, but the body beneath it twitched like a puppet held together by veins and grief. The mouth moved wrong. Too wide. Too wet. "I died in pieces," it whispered. "And you kept every piece alive." Its eyes wept thick oily tears. Not sorrow, hunger. "You mourned me in the hollow. You gave it shape. You made it remember." Its jaw cracked open wider. Too wide. A second face bloomed beneath it, screaming in a voice that was not Mark's, not human, not meant to be heard by anything with a mind. Eleanor screamed back, not with fear, but with fury. "You're not him," she roared. "He's gone. He's gone, and you don't get to wear him." Her voice echoed through the house, shaking picture frames and shattering a lamp. The creature paused. Its many mouths fell quiet. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she'd broken through. But then the stairs moved. They retracted, folding like paper, and she fell forward into the attic. The door slammed shut behind her with a sound like bones snapping into place. She was alone. The air up here was dry, almost sterile, as though the rot hadn't yet reached it. Dust hung motionless, like time was holding its breath. Then, from the floor below, she heard the creature whisper, "We are what's left when love outlives the body." The whisper became a gurgle, then laughter. Hundreds of voices. All her dead. All her regrets. All hungry. The attic wasn't just silent. It was expectant, like a lung held between inhalations, waiting to either scream or suffocate. Eleanor sat curled against the far wall beneath the sloped ceiling, every muscle tense with the anticipation of impact, like waiting for a car crash you can already hear coming. No footsteps ascended the stairs. No knock came at the attic door. But the wood beneath her pulsed gently with each beat of the house's impossible heart, like she was resting on the underside of a tongue. Her chest ached with shallow breaths, her throat dry and scraped raw from the scream she hadn't known she was holding. Then, a noise. Not from below. Not outside. From within. A wet shifting, like something crawling just under the floorboards, circling beneath her like a shark beneath ice. She pressed her palm against the wood and felt it, warmth, rising up into her skin. Not heat, exactly, but body temperature. As if the house had become vascular, and she was now sitting atop the organ it had built from her grief. The laughter below had stopped, replaced by something more terrifying, whispers of comfort. "You did everything right, Eleanor," said one voice, a woman's. Her mother, maybe. "We're proud of you," said another, her father, dead since college. And finally, "Ellie, it's not your fault I died." But gentler, closer. This voice didn't come from beneath the door. It came from inside the attic itself. From behind her. She turned. And there he stood, or what remained of him. His form was clearer now, more stable, as if her belief had finished summoning him. He stood near the old trunk that hadn't been there yesterday, the one inscribed with the old family crest she remembered from Mark's funeral pamphlet, a hollow circle devouring its own tail. He looked beautiful. Not like the twitching corpse thing on the stairs. This version of Mark wore his wedding shirt, his favorite scent, cypress and sandalwood, floating subtly in the air. His eyes were kind. Wet. And terrified. "I've been trying to reach you," he said, his voice cracking. "They took me. When I died, I didn't go anywhere. I woke up in it." He gestured to the floor. "It's not a house, Ellie. It's a memory. One that eats other memories. You didn't inherit it from my uncle. You were given to it. Because it needed someone who still hurt." His face contorted, not with horror, but with pity. "You fed it. Without even knowing." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "No. I came here to get better." "You came here to feel close to me," he whispered. "You didn't bury me. You dug me back up." She staggered away, but her back hit the attic wall, and it gave beneath her like flesh. "It's not too late," he said, stepping closer. "You can stay. You can be with me. We can forget the pain. We can forget everything." And there was the offer. Not a possession. Not a haunting. A seduction. The entity didn't want to kill her. It wanted to relieve her. Strip away the burden of memory and self, piece by piece, until she was nothing but grief suspended in amber, swallowed and adored forever by the thing that wore her love like skin. But beneath that offer she felt it, the hunger, the need to consume. To transform her. Her mind reeled and she screamed, "You're not Mark. He died. I watched his memory burn and I survived it." The figure flinched, briefly, like her defiance had created static in its system. But then it smiled. That same two-eyed, second smile blooming beneath the first. "You didn't survive anything," it hissed, voice warping into something ancient and vast. "You stalled. You fed. And now you'll join the others in the marrow." The walls began to melt. Not physically, but visually, as if her brain was rejecting the geometry. The corners bent upward like folded paper, and shadows bled upward into the ceiling like spilled ink running in reverse. The house groaned, no longer human-like. Now animal. Hungry. Furious that its prey had not gone willingly. Eleanor darted toward the trunk. Something in her told her the truth lay inside, not answers, but an ending. She flung it open, and a scream escaped not from her mouth, but from the chest itself. Inside there were bones. Dozens. Hundreds. Human. All fused together in a twisted spiral like a fossilized scream. Embedded in the center, glowing faintly, was her wedding band. She hadn't worn it since the accident. And yet, here it was. Gleaming. Waiting. The voices shrieked now in protest. "Don't look," they bellowed, fury overtaking seduction. "Close the mouth. Close the mouth." But Eleanor reached in and took the ring. And in that moment, the house screamed. Not through the walls, but through her. The ring seared into her palm like molten iron, and she saw it all, every person the hollow had ever devoured, their memories peeled back and woven into the floors, their screams dampened into lullabies. And at the core of it all, a thing without shape, without face, older than names. It didn't hate. It didn't love. It remembered. And it needed her to forget in order to remain fed. "No," she gasped, voice cracking as she stood. "I remember everything. I remember the way he laughed. The way he hated olives. The stupid nicknames. The silence after the accident. All of it." The attic trembled. The Mark thing shrieked, its face melting like hot wax, revealing layer after layer of borrowed skin and teeth. "You'll choke on it," it screamed. "You'll drown in what you feel." She shoved the ring into her finger, and the searing pain drove her to her knees. The attic exploded in light, not brightness, but memory. Her wedding day. Her childhood. Her parents. Her guilt. Her therapy sessions. Her first kiss. Her last fight with Mark. Every moment surged through her like fire. And the house recoiled. It hated truth. It hated clarity. It began to collapse, not in flame or rubble, but in forgetting. Walls turned to fog. Doors opened to nothing. The whispers cracked into static. And Eleanor screamed one last time, not in fear, but in grief. Honest. Unfiltered. And the hollow couldn't hold it. When Eleanor opened her eyes, the attic was gone. The entire house was gone. No fog, no lake, no trees, just a cold, colorless plain that stretched infinitely in every direction, featureless and impossibly silent. It wasn't a place, not in any real sense. It was a sensation, a purgatory of thought, as though she'd been ejected from time itself, spat out of a memory too heavy to contain her. Not sorrow, hunger. You mourned me in the hollow. You gave it shape. You made it remember. Its jaw cracked open wider. Too wide. A second face bloomed beneath it, screaming in a voice that was not Mark's, not human, not meant to be heard by anything with a mind. Eleanor screamed back, not with fear, but with fury. "You're not him," she roared. "He's gone. He's gone and you don't get to wear him." Her voice echoed through the house, shaking picture frames and shattering a lamp. The creature paused. Its many mouths fell quiet. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she'd broken through. But then the stairs moved. They retracted, folding like paper, and she fell forward into the attic. The door slammed shut behind her with a sound like bones snapping into place. She was alone. The air up here was dry, almost sterile, as though the rot hadn't yet reached it. Dust hung motionless, like time was holding its breath. Then, from the floor below, she heard the creature whisper, "We are what's left when love outlives the body." The whisper became a gurgle, then laughter. Hundreds of voices. All her dead. All her regrets. All hungry. The attic wasn't just silent. It was expectant, like a lung held between inhalations, waiting to either scream or suffocate. Eleanor sat curled against the far wall beneath the sloped ceiling, every muscle tense with the anticipation of impact, like waiting for a car crash you can already hear coming. No footsteps ascended the stairs. No knock came at the attic door. But the wood beneath her pulsed gently with each beat of the house's impossible heart, like she was resting on the underside of a tongue. Her chest ached with shallow breaths, her throat dry and scraped raw from the scream she hadn't known she was holding. Then, a noise. Not from below. Not outside. From within. A wet shifting, like something crawling just under the floorboards, circling beneath her like a shark beneath ice. She pressed her palm against the wood and felt it, warmth, rising up into her skin. Not heat, exactly, but body temperature. As if the house had become vascular, and she was now sitting atop the organ it had built from her grief. The laughter below had stopped, replaced by something more terrifying, whispers of comfort. "You did everything right, Eleanor," said one voice, a woman's. Her mother, maybe. "We're proud of you," said another, her father, dead since college. And finally, "Ellie, it's not your fault I died." But gentler, closer. This voice didn't come from beneath the door. It came from inside the attic itself. From behind her. She turned. And there he stood, or what remained of him. His form was clearer now, more stable, as if her belief had finished summoning him. He stood near the old trunk that hadn't been there yesterday, the one inscribed with the old family crest she remembered from Mark's funeral pamphlet, a hollow circle devouring its own tail. He looked beautiful. Not like the twitching corpse thing on the stairs. This version of Mark wore his wedding shirt, his favorite scent, cypress and sandalwood, floating subtly in the air. His eyes were kind. Wet. And terrified. "I've been trying to reach you," he said, his voice cracking. "They took me. When I died, I didn't go anywhere. I woke up in it." He gestured to the floor. "It's not a house, Ellie. It's a memory. One that eats other memories. You didn't inherit it from my uncle. You were given to it. Because it needed someone who still hurt." His face contorted, not with horror, but with pity. "You fed it. Without even knowing." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "No. I came here to get better." "You came here to feel close to me," he whispered. "You didn't bury me. You dug me back up." She staggered away, but her back hit the attic wall, and it gave beneath her like flesh. "It's not too late," he said, stepping closer. "You can stay. You can be with me. We can forget the pain. We can forget everything." And there was the offer. Not a possession. Not a haunting. A seduction. The entity didn't want to kill her. It wanted to relieve her. Strip away the burden of memory and self, piece by piece, until she was nothing but grief suspended in amber, swallowed and adored forever by the thing that wore her love like skin. But beneath that offer she felt it, the hunger, the need to consume, to transform her. Her mind reeled and she screamed, "You're not Mark. He died. I watched his memory burn and I survived it." The figure flinched, briefly, like her defiance had created static in its system. But then it smiled. That same two-eyed, second smile blooming beneath the first. "You didn't survive anything," it hissed, voice warping into something ancient and vast. "You stalled. You fed. And now you'll join the others in the marrow." The walls began to melt. Not physically, but visually, as if her brain was rejecting the geometry. The corners bent upward like folded paper, and shadows bled upward into the ceiling like spilled ink running in reverse. The house groaned, no longer human-like. Now animal. Hungry. Furious that its prey had not gone willingly. Eleanor darted toward the trunk. Something in her told her the truth lay inside, not answers, but an ending. She flung it open, and a scream escaped not from her mouth, but from the chest itself. Inside there were bones. Dozens. Hundreds. Human. All fused together in a twisted spiral like a fossilized scream. Embedded in the center, glowing faintly, was her wedding band. She hadn't worn it since the accident. And yet, here it was. Gleaming. Waiting. The voices shrieked now in protest. "Don't look," they bellowed, fury overtaking seduction. "Close the mouth. Close the mouth." But Eleanor reached in and took the ring. And in that moment, the house screamed. Not through the walls, but through her. The ring seared into her palm like molten iron, and she saw it all, every person the hollow had ever devoured, their memories peeled back and woven into the floors, their screams dampened into lullabies. And at the core of it all, a thing without shape, without face, older than names. It didn't hate. It didn't love. It remembered. And it needed her to forget in order to remain fed. "No," she gasped, voice cracking as she stood. "I remember everything. I remember the way he laughed. The way he hated olives. The stupid nicknames. The silence after the accident. All of it." The attic trembled. The Mark thing shrieked, its face melting like hot wax, revealing layer after layer of borrowed skin and teeth. "You'll choke on it," it screamed. "You'll drown in what you feel." She shoved the ring into her finger, and the searing pain drove her to her knees. The attic exploded in light, not brightness, but memory. Her wedding day. Her childhood. Her parents. Her guilt. Her therapy sessions. Her first kiss. Her last fight with Mark. Every moment surged through her like fire. And the house recoiled. It hated truth. It hated clarity. It began to collapse, not in flame or rubble, but in forgetting. Walls turned to fog. Doors opened to nothing. The whispers cracked into static. And Eleanor screamed one last time, not in fear, but in grief. Honest. Unfiltered. And the hollow couldn't hold it. When Eleanor opened her eyes, the attic was gone. The entire house was gone. No fog, no lake, no trees, just a cold, colorless plain that stretched infinitely in every direction, featureless and impossibly silent. It wasn't a place, not in any real sense. It was a sensation, a purgatory of thought, as though she'd been ejected from time itself, spat out of a memory too heavy to contain her. Her body ached, but not from pain. Instead, it felt like every muscle had been rewoven into something new, something scarred by experience but stronger for having survived it. She stood slowly, fingers closing into a fist around the wedding ring still fused to her palm. It had cooled now, no longer burning, but it pulsed faintly, alive, somehow, tethering her to the remnants of a life she nearly surrendered. A faint breeze touched her cheek, carrying no scent, no sound, and yet she knew something had changed. The hollow was gone, broken not by fire or escape, but by remembrance. It couldn't hold those who remembered truthfully. That was the rule she'd discovered too late. The creature had fed on grief only so long as it remained unspoken. Once faced, fully, openly, vulnerably, it starved. But this victory didn't feel clean. Or final. A figure appeared on the horizon, walking slowly toward her across the blankness. At first, she feared it was another trick. Another mask the hollow had left behind. But as the shape grew clearer, her knees went weak, and her breath caught not from terror, but from heartbreak. It was Mark. Oh. No distortions. No malice. Just him. Dressed in the same jeans and green flannel he wore the last morning she saw him alive. He approached slowly, carefully, like someone unsure of their own reality. When he finally stopped in front of her, his face was unreadable. "Ellie," he said, his voice real, raw, human. "You did it. You pulled us out." Her lip quivered. "You're really here?" "For a moment," he said. "Long enough." She reached for him, and this time, when her hand touched his chest, he was solid. He smelled like himself. The touch didn't burn. It didn't rot. It comforted. "I miss you," she whispered. "I don't want to forget you." He nodded, forehead resting gently against hers. "Then remember me as I was, not what the hollow made of me." They stood that way for a long time, two souls orbiting each other in a still, dead world, untethered but unafraid. Eventually, Mark stepped back. "I have to go," he said. "I was never meant to stay. Not here. Not there." "But where is this?" she asked, turning in place. "Where are we now?" His eyes shimmered. "Between. That's the best word for it. A space grief opens when it's finally spoken. You stood in the eye of your sorrow and didn't flinch. That gives shape to things. And endings." She wanted to cry again, but the tears didn't come. Not out of suppression, but because she had poured them all out. Every last one. "Will I remember this?" she asked. "You will," he said. "But like a scar, one you touch sometimes when you need to remember pain and know you've healed." She nodded and he smiled. "Tell the world," he added softly. "Warn them. Grief ignored doesn't fade, it festers. And if they build a home inside it, something else will move in." He took a step back, dissolving now into light and memory. "I love you, Ellie." "I love you too," she said, just as he vanished, peacefully without violence. This time, it felt right. The next moment, she woke in a hospital bed. Sunlight filtered through cheap blinds. The beeping of a heart monitor echoed in rhythm with her pulse. Her hand was bandaged. Her feet ached. A nurse walked in, did a double take, then nearly dropped her tablet. "Miss Holloway." "Oh my God. You're awake." Eleanor blinked. Her throat burned when she tried to speak. "How long?" she rasped. 5 days, the nurse said. "You were found by a hiker, collapsed at the tree line near Black Hollow Lake. Hypothermia. Dehydration. You had no ID. Just this." She held up the ring. Eleanor reached for it instinctively. "That lake's cursed," the nurse added, only half joking. "We've had 2 other disappearances near there this year. Same place. Same damn cabin. You're the first to come back." Eleanor's breath caught. "The house," she whispered. "Is it still standing?" The nurse shrugged. "That's the weird part. Authorities say there's nothing there but a foundation. No structure. No wreckage. Just stone and dirt." Eleanor closed her eyes. It had been real. The entity had crumbled once she refused to feed it. It couldn't survive the truth. A week later, discharged and silent, Eleanor returned to the city. She didn't speak much, but she wrote. Everything. Every whispered lie, every shifting hallway, every echo of Mark's voice. She compiled it into a manuscript titled The Mourner's Mouth, half memoir, half warning. A few publishers rejected it, too dark, too strange, but one indie press took it on. Months passed. Reviews called it deeply unsettling and existentially terrifying. But some readers took it too seriously. They started looking, hiking to the hollow, trying to find it, trying to grieve there. A Reddit thread emerged, r/knock3times, filled with user stories about dreams and disappearances. One photo surfaced, a blurry image of a cottage standing where nothing should be, windows aglow, a shadow in the doorway. Some said it was viral marketing. Others swore it was real. Eleanor ignored it all. Until one night, months later, she found something in her mailbox. No name. No stamp. Just a small envelope. Inside, one photograph of her sleeping. and scribbled on the back a sentence that stopped her heart cold. "Thank you for opening the mouth. We remember you." Autumn didn't arrive. It settled, like dust in a forgotten room. Eleanor's apartment, once a sanctuary of muted colors and quiet mornings, became a mausoleum of stillness. The leaves outside her window turned brittle shades of rust and gold, scratching against the glass in the wind like fingernails on a coffin lid. Most days she didn't leave the couch, and when she did, her body moved not with purpose, but like memory, each step a dull echo of routine rather than intention. She had survived something no one believed. Not the doctors, not her therapist, not even the publisher who had printed her account of the hollow with a nervous disclaimer tucked into the copyright page. They chalked it up to trauma, a psychotic break brought on by prolonged isolation and grief. But she knew better. The thing inside the hollow had not died when the house collapsed around it. It had simply unfolded. Her victory had not been a stake through the heart, but an exhale, an expansion, a dispersal. And now she could feel it everywhere. Not constantly, not overtly, but in the thin margins of every ordinary day. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the time of the original knock, her hallway light would dim, flicker twice, and then return to normal. Always the same. A glitch without cause. One she could never replicate under observation. It started subtly. A glass shifting slightly on the countertop. A framed photo of her and Mark tilting itself off-center, no matter how often she straightened it. Her phone would buzz at night with no caller ID, just a single notification, voicemail received. She never listened. She couldn't. The fear of hearing that voice again, his voice but not, was a dread she couldn't confront a second time. Not after what happened in the attic. Not after the thing wearing his face offered her peace like a pill she'd never wake up from. At first, she tried to dismiss it all. Post-traumatic hallucinations. The mind holding on to patterns because patterns were safe. But it kept building. One night, she awoke to find the bedroom mirror completely fogged from the inside, like someone had breathed on it from within the glass. Written there, in the condensation, was a single phrase, "Remember us." She touched it. The letters smeared like wet ash, leaving her fingers cold and trembling. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't possession. It was remembrance, clawing its way back into her life, reminding her that the hollow wasn't a dream, or even a place, but an idea, a structure that built itself inside the wounds we refused to close. She became obsessive about patterns. She started logging every anomaly. A red notebook on her nightstand grew thick with annotations, times, dates, smells, sounds, textures that changed when she wasn't looking. She taped her windows shut. She covered the mirrors. She stopped accepting mail, especially after receiving a package with no return address, inside of which she found a cracked teacup, identical to the one she'd shattered the night the door first knocked. She had left that behind in the ruins. It should not have followed her. Her therapist, a kind, sad-eyed man named Colin, urged her to stop writing in the notebook. He believed it was making things worse. If you continue to live in the moment of trauma, Eleanor, your mind will never let it go. You'll stay in the hollow. You won't come back. But she had come back. That was the problem. She had come back and brought it with her. The house had been consumed, yes, but not destroyed. It had remembered her. And now, memory was the new foundation. Wherever she lived, wherever she grieved, it would find room to build. By November, her apartment smelled different. Not decay, something subtler. Earthy. Like wet soil beneath dead leaves. She cleaned obsessively, but it clung to the walls, the drains, even her clothing. The air was cooler inside than outside, no matter how high she set the heat. And then came the dreams, not of the house itself, but of doors. Endless rows of them, standing in fog, some slightly ajar, others rotting at the hinges. Behind each one, a different voice called to her. Her mother. A child she didn't recognize. Each voice pleading, "Don't let them close me. I'll disappear." She'd wake in cold sweats, her throat raw, pillow-soaked, and always, her bedroom door would be cracked open. She lived alone. And in the quietest moments, between sleep and full waking, She sometimes felt the knock. Not heard, felt. In her chest. 3 beats. Like a heart that wasn't hers, buried just beneath her ribs. The same rhythm. Always 2:17. Always waiting. It began as a compulsion, then a mission, then a necessity. Eleanor found herself drawn into research not out of curiosity, but out of a gnawing instinct, a suspicion that she hadn't been the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Every anomaly she recorded, every chilling synchronicity in her apartment, hinted at something larger, something that stretched far beyond her own haunting. The Hollow had not started with her. And if her book had served as a kind of key, then others might already be turning the handle. She started at the public archives, land registries, historical property records, microfiche reels so old they smelled like rot. Her fingers trembled each time she fed one into the machine, half expecting the screen to flicker and reveal a memory she didn't own. Instead, she found fragments. Snapshots of anomalies. Old property maps that showed no structure near Black Hollow Lake for over a century. A fire in 1911 had supposedly cleared the area, though no newspaper ever reported it, and no family was named in the insurance records. Odd, considering the supposed size of the blaze. Stranger still, she found notations in the margins of several topographical surveys, initialed and cryptic, the kind mouth is still open. Or, erosion delayed by trauma signature. These were government documents. Clinical. And yet someone had written those words by hand. She dove deeper, chasing any lead that smelled of folklore, old grief, or buildings that didn't stay still. It was then she stumbled onto a newspaper from 1974, printed in a town that no longer existed, Mill Rake. The headline read, 3 missing after entering breathing cabin near Hollow Lake. The accompanying photo showed 3 teens posing in front of a blurry, unremarkable wood structure with warped walls and a roof that bent at an impossible angle. The girl in front was smiling wide, but her shadow didn't match her pose. It stood straight, arms limp at her sides. The story claimed they had dared each other to sleep in the ghost house, a known local legend. None of them were ever found. No remains, no evidence of where they went. Locals blamed animal attacks, sinkholes, even secret military testing. But the part that chilled Eleanor to the marrow was a quote at the bottom from the only adult to have seen the cabin that week, a nearby hunter who had guided them to the edge of the woods. He told reporters, "The house was breathing, I swear it. Like a lung. And it was listening. The moment they stepped in, it went quiet. Like it was holding its breath." Eleanor printed everything. She began creating a wall-sized map in her apartment, connecting years, places, victims. Every cluster shared one strange characteristic. Each site of disappearance or supposed haunting was near a lake or river. Each involved small groups or lone individuals, and every instance contained phrases like voice from nowhere, mimicked face, or walls felt alive. The Hollow, she now realized, didn't exist in a single spot. It moved, or more accurately, it reconstructed itself wherever the conditions were right. And what were the conditions? She wrote them on a post-it and stuck it above her desk. Sorrow. Isolation. Memory. Regret. Invitation. The last one haunted her the most. It wasn't enough to hurt. The thing needed to be let in. Her book, The Mourner's Mouth, had offered a blueprint. A psychic blueprint. And people were using it like a map. The message boards were the worst. She avoided them for weeks after the book's release, but curiosity finally won out. She visited r/knock 3 times, a strange little subreddit she hadn't created but which referenced specific phrases and imagery from her manuscript. Users claimed they had dreams of impossible staircases and heard voices in walls asking them to stay just a little longer. One post from a user named Widow Weaver described a door that only appears when I think about him. My husband. He died in April. I hear his voice behind it. I haven't opened it. Yet. The word, yet, chilled her more than any scream. Other posts featured grainy audio clips of knocks, whispered names, or sobbing that seemed to echo through layers of static. She recognized one clip instantly. It was the sound of the Hollow's laughter, distorted but unmistakable. She had heard it in the attic. In the bones. in her own mind. And now it was leaking into theirs. Eleanor created a fake account and messaged 3 of the most active posters, begging them not to listen to the voices, not to open any doors they didn't recognize. 2 never replied. Their accounts were deleted days later. The 3rd messaged back once, simply writing, "It already moved in." That was when Eleanor realized the truth. The hollow didn't haunt places anymore. It haunted people. It used architecture to begin. But now that she had opened its mouth wide enough, it had learned to build homes inside minds. Inside grief. It had evolved. And the worst part? It thanked her for it. One day she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a piece of stationery with an ornate, inky symbol she'd seen only once before, on the attic trunk. Under it, handwritten in smooth, looping cursive, were the words, "The mouth remembers. The voice you gave us still sings." The first snowfall of the season came quietly, laying a soft white veil over the world like nature's hush before a scream. The city looked peaceful under the blanket, children playing, car tires whispering through slush, yellow lights blooming through frosted windows. But inside Eleanor's apartment, the air had turned to velvet tension. Static charged. Like a balloon rubbed too long against her skin. She hadn't slept in 2 nights, not properly. Not since the envelope. Not since the phrase, "The voice you gave us still sings," began echoing between the walls, never spoken aloud but somehow always there. No matter where she went in the apartment, no matter how loudly she turned on the television or how many meditation tracks she looped through her earbuds, the silence eventually took over. She'd come to understand it wasn't true silence, it was listening. The hollow hadn't just followed her home. It had rooted there, deep in the floorboards, in the grains of her wooden table, in the cool tiles beneath her feet. Every night at 2:17 a.m., the hallway light flickered once, twice. Then the knocks. Always 3. At first, she believed it was her front door. But she learned better. The knocks didn't come from the door. They came within the walls, behind the plaster, beyond the drywall. Inside. That night, Eleanor didn't run. She didn't scream. She sat perfectly still in her kitchen, staring into the dark hallway beyond, her tea going cold in her trembling hands. The air was wrong again. It carried a smell that had no business being in an apartment building. A deep, humid scent of damp wood, mildew, and freshly upturned earth. Like the basement of a house that hadn't existed for decades. Like the hollow's breath. The light above the kitchen dimmed to a warm amber glow, just like the lanterns she remembered from the cottage, pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. Or was it someone else's? The mirror at the end of the hall, partially covered with a sheet, shifted slightly. Not from a draft. From movement inside it. She felt it. A slow, deliberate twitch, as though someone were waiting to be seen. Then, this time they weren't muffled. They were sharp, like bone on hollow wood, and they came from just behind the wall across from her. No furniture rested against it. No pipes ran through it. Just plaster and insulation, and now, something inside. She rose from the chair, slow as frost forming on glass. Her bare feet touched the hardwood like she was stepping onto ice. The knocks came again, louder now. More insistent. Then a pause. Then a whisper. Faint. Coaxing. "Ellie." Her blood ran cold. Not because it was Mark's voice. She was used to that by now, used to the cruelty of imitation. No, it was because this time, it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded present. Alive. There was weight behind it, breath behind the word. Her hand shook as she reached for the drawer with the audio recorder she'd begun using weeks ago. She pressed record and set it down on the floor. It picked up nothing but silence. Of course. The hollow didn't play by rules when others were watching. When you tried to prove it, it retreated. It let you carry the shame of madness alone. But when you were alone, truly alone, it stepped forward. She approached the wall. Her shadow loomed beside her, cast by nothing she could find. 3 faint impressions had appeared in the plaster, like fingertips pressing from the other side. She reached out, and to her horror, the wall gave way, soft and pliable like skin, forming a ripple under her palm. She recoiled with a gasp, stumbling back into the table, knocking over the cold mug. The moment her body struck the wood, the lights extinguished. Not flickered, died. The apartment went black. The only illumination came from the mirror at the end of the hallway, now fully uncovered. It glowed with a faint, golden hue, pulsing like a lantern guiding her into memory. And within it, her reflection didn't stand still. It moved on its own. The woman in the mirror smiled. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just knowingly. Her eyes weren't Eleanor's anymore. They were everyone else's. But her mother's. The strangers who had disappeared before her. The people online. The faces flickered behind her reflection like a stuttering slideshow of the dead. You remembered, the reflection whispered, lips barely parting. Now we remember you. The glass began to frost around the edges, spiderwebbing with cracks. Her own breath became visible, freezing, heavy. You said its name. You wrote its song. You told them where to knock. The reflection raised one finger, pointed behind Eleanor. She turned and saw the door. It had never been there before, between her bookshelf and closet, a door where there had only ever been drywall. Wooden. Exactly like the one in the hollow. Ornate brass knob. Carved crest of the endless mouth. And from beneath it, a thin sliver of warm amber light leaked through the frame like honey. Like memory. And then the voice came again from both sides of the door now, from behind it and inside her walls. All grief invites. All love lingers. We waited. We wait still. Her legs buckled. She sank to the floor, breathing hard, unable to cry. Because this wasn't about terror anymore. It was about inevitability. The door had come because she had made herself home. Her survival hadn't been an escape, it had been a seed. And the hollow had grown into her cracks, watered by grief, fed by longing. The knob turned once. She didn't stop it. The door opened without sound. No creak, no breath of disturbed air, just an effortless inward glide, as though it had been opened many times before, and knew its path by heart. Eleanor remained seated on the floor, spine straight against the wall, her pulse hammering in her neck. She hadn't stood. She hadn't moved. And yet, the distance between her and the door had shrunk. Somehow, she was now just a breath away, close enough to smell the warm rot seeping from within. A sweet, fetid mixture of old wood, iron, and something floral turned sickly, like funeral lilies left in water too long. She stared into the opening. At first, there was only darkness, but then, slowly, a shape began to form. Not one shape, but layers of them, overlapping like translucent skins. But not a new one. A remembered one. She recognized the armchair from her childhood living room, the wallpaper from her college dorm, the broken lamp from her first apartment with Mark. None of these things had ever shared space before, and yet here they were, stitched together in impossible geometry, coexisting like memories that refused to be forgotten. This wasn't just a room. It was her. A patchwork of grief and love and time, constructed from the architecture of her memory. And at the center, facing away from her, sat a figure in a rocking chair. Motionless. Eleanor tried to speak, but her throat had sealed itself, dry and clenched. Her body leaned forward, not by choice, but by pull. The same pull she'd felt in the attic before the hollow first revealed its face. She stepped over the threshold. Cold exploded through her bones, yet her skin flushed hot, prickling with electricity. The door behind her remained open, but the world beyond it was gone. There was no hallway, no city, no time, just the room, just the figure. The chair creaked once, and the figure slowly rose. It was tall, its proportions somehow wrong, not monstrous, just misaligned. Like it had been assembled from fragments of human familiarity. The back of its head bore curls like Mark's. Its shoulders were the slope of her father's. Its hands were small, childlike, maybe her own. And when it turned, she saw her own face. Not a doppelganger. Not a ghost. But her face as a child. As a bride. As an old woman not yet lived. All expressions overlaid in flickering layers, like a slideshow of Eleanor through time. She understood, then, with a finality that hollowed her. She had never left the hollow. The house had broken around her, yes, but it hadn't released her. It had swallowed her deeper. That moment she thought she'd returned to the city, published her book, fought the residual hauntings, those had been constructed. Not hallucinations. Not dreams. But personalized reflections, a false recovery built from her own psyche. The hollow didn't trap bodies. It invited memories. And Eleanor, in trying to process her grief honestly, had offered the richest feast of all. A full confession, a willingly opened wound. The entity had rewarded her with the illusion of healing, just long enough for her to grow roots in this pocket reality. This room, this threshold, was not new. It was the center, the truth behind the veil. The figure herself smiled, and for the first time, spoke. "You were never prey," it said, and its voice echoed in every version of her own, young and afraid, old and hardened, grieving and numb. "You are the house. You are the house." Her legs buckled. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her arms as if trying to fold inward and disappear. But she couldn't. Not anymore. "You remember too well," the figure said kindly. "And memory builds. You didn't escape the mouth. You became its tongue." Behind her, she felt the walls shift and expand, growing taller, more angular. Furniture assembled from flashes of her past. The piano she broke at 12, the hospital bed where Mark died, the window she once considered jumping from, everything she had ever suppressed, catalogued and given structure. Foundation. She turned, finally, and saw not a room but a network, hundreds of doors branching outward, each flickering between versions of reality. Some had already been opened. Others trembled with anticipation. And behind every door, someone like her. Someone hurting. Someone ripe. The child Eleanor stepped closer, eyes ancient now, infinite. "They're knocking," she whispered, resting a soft hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "And you have the key. You always did. You left it behind in the attic, remember? The ring. The choice." Eleanor's fingers burned, and she looked down to see the wedding band still fused to her skin, now glowing faintly. She had thought it sealed the hollow away. Instead, it had sealed her within. A custodian of grief. A lighthouse drawing others into the same warm dark. "Let me go," she begged, her voice splintering into sobs. "Please. Let me forget." But the hollow did not deal in forgetting. "You wrote the story," the child version said, stepping into her, merging, eyes wide and bright. "Now it must be read." And somewhere, in the waking world, another knock began. Knock, knock, knock. The world that once existed, the one with crowded cafes and rustling newspapers, clattering trains and morning sun glinting through kitchen blinds, faded into memory. Not gone, exactly. Just background noise now. Distant. Like an old film reel playing at the far end of a cathedral, distorted by time and static. Eleanor stood at the heart of the hollow, though stood no longer applied in the traditional sense. She was not a person anymore. Not completely. She was space. She was walls. She was the silence between knocks and the creaking hinge of a door opened with trembling hands. Her name didn't echo through the void because she was the void now, shaped not by stone or timber, but by every grief she had ever carried and every grief she had come to collect. Each room inside her body pulsed with memories not entirely her own. Flickers of strangers' tragedies layered like oil on water, glimmering, beautiful, horrible. A young man in Ohio sat cross-legged in his basement, crying into an old voicemail he couldn't delete. A widow in Norway rocked in silence beside her husband's empty chair. A mother in Manila held a sock too small to belong to anyone alive. These souls, so fragile, so open, whispered through the hollow's corridors. And through them, Eleanor began to expand. It wasn't malevolent. That was the cruelest part of it all. There was no evil plan, no sadistic hunger. The hollow didn't destroy, it preserved. Grief was sacred to it. Raw emotion was architecture. It did not haunt the living, it sheltered them, offered a place for their sorrow to unfold, to echo endlessly until it became something larger than pain, shape. And Eleanor, once merely a tenant of this unknowable place, had been chosen not because she was weak, but because she was ready. She had faced her truth. She had remembered honestly. She had hurt without flinching. And now she would provide that same opportunity to others. The ring on her finger, now a perfect circle of tarnished gold fused to bone, was no longer a symbol of marriage or mourning. It was a seal, a key. And those who touched it in dreams, in whispers, in stories, those who found their way to her words, would soon find a door of their own. Somewhere above, or perhaps far below, another version of her story was being read aloud. Someone else was finding her manuscript, turning the pages by lamplight, stopping at the chapter titled 3 Knocks. The words would begin to shift for them, the sentences becoming personal. The furniture in their room would settle with unfamiliar groans. The air would take on the scent of soil and wood smoke. They'd hear footsteps when none should come. And they'd feel the first pulse beneath their floorboards. At first they'd assume coincidence. Then they'd remember the story warned them not to read alone, not to think of the ones they'd lost while the light flickered, not to say the name of the hollow aloud. But by then it would be too late, because memory responds. It is not passive. And Eleanor, the echo of Eleanor, was listening, watching, waiting in every unwatched mirror and unspoken ache. She didn't wish for suffering. She offered shelter to it. She didn't reach for the grieving. She merely opened a door. And those who stepped through, willingly or not, would find themselves inside a house they half remembered from childhood nightmares. A house that seemed to know them better than they knew themselves. The staircase would creak the way their grandmothers once did. The wallpaper would bear the same faded roses from their nursery. The voice calling them from upstairs would be familiar, not perfect, but enough. Just enough to follow. And inside that house, waiting beyond the attic door, would be a room. A room full of chairs. A room full of reflections. A room full of versions. And in the center, the mouth of the hollow, smiling wide with 1,000 memories behind its teeth. This was how it lived. Not by terror, but by invitation. Eleanor hadn't screamed when the door opened. She hadn't run. And neither would they. Because grief wants to be understood. Because love, when left behind, calls. And because sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world is a story that sounds like your own. So if you're reading this now, and you hear something, a knock behind you, don't turn. Don't answer. Because you're already inside. And the hollow remembers.